Hey everyone. That's not what I wanted to show. Hmm. Damn, I missed or I lost the video. Oh my God, it's hot today. I'll tell you that. It went from snowing to what even is the temperature
The
right
Church
now?
of St. George in the east is quite.
Right now it's almost 30 degrees. Like it's hot. Hey, hot as hell. You guys must be hotter than hell too, kitties. Hey Zuna. Yeah, the temperature just went crazy. Hey, Heavenly Cow. Oh, I missed you guys too. Yeah, I just got busy with the nicer weather and stuff like that. I apologize. People show up and want to hang out, and I just can't help myself because I've been locked up all winter long. I'm going crazy. So my aunt actually came over. What the hell day is it? Today's what, Thursday? Not yesterday. She came over Tuesday. Yeah. Is it really? It is so hot. I can't believe it. Like I'm not complaining. I love my summer. I love my spring. I even like the fall, sort of. But this winter shit had it's depressing. And then once yeah, it was like yesterday it went up to 18. Today it's now almost 30. I couldn't believe it. It's like holy crap. It literally went from winter to summer like that. Like I have to get my air conditioner out. Meanwhile, what, a week ago? Not even. It was snowing. Nice, yeah, nice weather there too. Good. I just can't believe how hot it got. Whew. It's only 5? Yeah, we're on like 30. I don't get it. That's Canada for you though. One minute it's snowing, the next minute it's summer. I don't it's messed up. All right, so I'm just gonna get on reading here. Ever since the hotter weather too, my girl cats, I have 2 females and 1 male, but the 2 females lay on the couch with me. Like, it's cute. I gotta show you. So there's Claire, and behind her is Dilly. She matches the couch. I think it's hilarious. They're all zoinked out. You guys all hot? Oh, are you weak? Are you awake, little deal? Mm. All right, I'll stop bugging. Okay, so we're still in the Eddowes inquest, and literally going through corners, witnesses, everything. Oof, your breath stinks. Whew, need a mint. So the last witness was Frederick William Foster. A 26-old Jewry stated that he was an architect and a surveyor, and he had made the plans produced according to scale, whatever the hell that meant. He had them in 3 scales, one to fit 8 feet to an inch, another 200 feet to an inch from an ordnance map of the city. Okay, so he had maps. And he had marked on the ordnance map of the same scale round from Burner Street to Mitre Street. That would be a distance of about 3/4 of a mile, and it would take from 12 to 15 minutes to walk it. Here's another witness, Mr. Crawford. So by Mr. Crawford, the route described between Burner Street and Mitre Street was the nearest way. It was a direct line. Mr. Crawford said again, assuming that a person was in Mitre Square, I want to know what route he would probably take, assuming that he passed by way of Goulston Street. This witness says there's 2 routes. There's only 10 feet difference between them. One route is from Church Passage through Duke Street, crossing Houndsditch through Gravel Story Lane, crossing Petticoat Lane, and through to Goulston Street. I know Flower and Dean Street. Mr. Crawford states, would a person to get to the lodging house there from Mitre Street go by Goulston Street? This witness says he might do so. It is the most direct course he could take if he knew the neighborhood. He could do the distance in a quarter of an hour, and the distance from Burner Street to Mitre Street would be within a quarter of an hour. Mr. Crawford states to the coroner, "You will have evidence later on that portion of this woman's apron, which was found in Galston Street." Hey, Teresa. Hey, co-gamer. The witness Wilkinson was then recalled, and in answer to Mr. Crawford stated, referring to his book, that Kelly slept at the lodging house on Friday and Saturday night and number 52 single. Witness could not say at what time any stranger entered the place. He found that there were 6 male strangers there on Sunday morning. He could not tell whether any of those men came in about 2 o'clock on the Sunday morning, nor could he remember anyone going out of the place soon after 12 o'clock, as that was a very busy time. He took the money and allotted the beds. Nothing excited his suspicion between the hours of 12 a.m. and 2. He recollected the police calling at 3 o'clock on Sunday morning. By the juryman, they state it was usual for the place to be open at 2 o'clock in the morning. They generally close at 2:30 or 3. He had no means of remembering any person coming in. He would recognize a regular customer. He did not book the times they came in. By Mr. Crawford again. There was no register kept of the names of those sleeping there. And by the jury, we take the money of those who come. No questions are asked, and they are shown their beds. I dare say I have over 100 sleeping there now a night. Hey, SD. Hey, Dahaga. Oh, I'm just loving the weather today. I was just telling Heavenly Cow and Zuna, just it's been nice. There was snow on the ground, and it was snowing and everything else like a couple days ago, and now it's summer. It's like 30 degrees. It's awesome. Inspector Edward Collard, which is with the city police, was the next witness called. He stated that at 5 minutes before 2 o'clock on Sunday morning that he received information at Bishopgate Street Police Station that a woman had been murdered in Mutter Square. The information was at once telegraphed to headquarters, and he dispatched a constable at once to Dr. Gordon Brown. Witness then proceeded himself to Mutter Square, arriving there at 2 or 3 minutes past 2. He there found Dr. Sequeira, several police officers, and the deceased lying in the southwest corner of the square in the position described by Constable Watkins. The body was not touched until the arrival of Dr. Brown, who came shortly afterwards. The medical gentleman then examined the body and remained until the arrival of the ambulance when the body was taken to the mortuary. I think with Catherine Eddowes, this is the first time. Hey, Joe. This is the first time no one's touched the body before a doctor had arrived. They got up to 80. Yeah, it's hot. Oh my god, I love chicken Alfredo. Hey, mama. I really love, like, Alfredo. No money was found on the deceased. A portion of the apron produced was found on her, and the other portion, which was picked up in Woolston Street, would also be produced. When witnesses arrived at the square, he took immediate steps to have the neighborhood searched for the person who had committed the murder. Mr. M. William, the chief of the detectives, on his arrival shortly afterwards with a number of detectives, sent them to make sure in all directions in Spitalfields, both in the streets and the lodging houses. Several men were stopped and searched in the streets, but without any good result. Witness had a house-to-house inquiry made in the vicinity of Mutter Square, but could find nothing beyond that, what would be stated by 2 witnesses who would be called. Again by Mr. Crawford. There was no appearance of any struggle had taken place, and there was no blood anywhere except that had come from the deceased's neck. There was nothing whatever in the appearance of the deceased or her clothing to lead him to suppose that there had been any struggle. The blood flowing from her was in liquid state, not congealed, and from his experience, he should say that the body had not been there for more than a quarter of an hour. They endeavored a find of footmarks, but they could discover no trace whatsoever. So there's no footprints. Yeah, it's hot, eh? I love it. It just what I don't like is when it goes from like winter and the next day summer. I think that's what gets you kind of sick. Like my heat's been on for like 2 days, but I'm just like, when is it going to snow again? A search was made at the back of the empty houses adjoining the square. So this is by Dr. Frederick Gordon Brown of 17 Finsbury Circus. A doctor at Finsbury Circus. Huh. Examined, said he was a surgeon of the City of London Police Force. He was called on Sunday morning after 2 o'clock and reached Menor Square about 18 minutes after 2 when his attention was called to the body of the deceased, which was Catherine Eddowes. It was lying in the position described by Constable Watkins. The body was on its back, the head turned towards the left shoulder, and the arms were by the side of the body, as if they had fallen there. Both palms were upwards and the fingers were slightly bent. A thimble was lying on the ground near the right hand. The clothes were drawn up. The left leg was extended straight down in a line with the body, and the right leg was bent at the thigh and knee. There was great disfigurement of the face. The throat was cut across, and below the cut was a neckerchief. The upper part of the dress had been pulled open a little way. The abdomen was all exposed. The intestines were drawn out to a large extent and placed over the right shoulder. That's disgusting. A piece of the intestines was quite detached from the body and placed between the left arm and the body. I don't understand this Jack the Ripper. It's like he tries to outgross everyone with each victim that comes next. So Mr. Crawford says, by place, do you mean put there by design? And the witness stated yes. And the examination continued. The lobe of the right ear was cut obliquely through. There was a quantity of clotted blood on the pavement, on the left side of the neck and upper part of the arm. The body was quite warm, and no death stiffening had taken place. The body had been there only a few minutes. By Mr. Crawford, certainly within 30 or 40 minutes. The examination continued. We looked for the superficial bruises and saw none. There were no marks of blood below the middle of the body. By Mr. Crawford again. There's no blood on the front of the clothes. Before they removed the body, he suggested that Dr. Phillips should be sent for, and that gentleman, who had seen some recent cases, came to the mortuary. A post-mortem examination was made at 2:30 on Sunday afternoon. The temperature of the room was 55 degrees. Rigor mortis was well marked. After careful washing of the left hand, a recent bruise the size of a sixpence was discovered on the back of the hand between the thumb and the first finger. There were a few small bruises on the right shin of an older date. The hands and arms were bronzed as if from sunburning. There were no bruises on the scalp, back of the body, or elbows. The witness then described in detail the cuts on her face, which he stated was very much mutilated. That's the first time he ever mutilated one of his victims' faces, too. Hey, Kimmy. The throat was cut across to the extent of about 6 or 7 inches. The sternomastoid muscle was divided. The cartilage below the vocal cords was severed through the middle. The large vessels on the left side of the neck were severed to the bone. The knife marking the intervertebral cartilage, the sheath of the vessels on the right side was just open. The carotid artery had a pinhole opening. The internal jugular vein was open to the extent of 1.5 inches, not divided. All the injuries were caused by some very sharp instrument like a knife and pointed. The cause of death was a hemorrhage from the left common carotid artery. The death was immediate. The mutilations were inflicted after death. That's bad. Like, really gross. It's not good enough for him that they were dead. He's got to make a mockery of her body as well. You know what I mean? So disrespectful. The whole thing is. The incisions, this part. The death was immediate. The mutilations were inflicted after death. They examined the injuries to the abdomen. The walls of the abdomen were laid open. Wow, I couldn't even picture looking at something like that. Even to try and picture that, I know I'd faint. I couldn't do it. The walls of the abdomen were laid open from the breast downwards. The cut commenced opposite the cartilage in the center of the body. The incision went upwards, not penetrating the skin that was over the sternum. It then divided the cartilage and being gristle. Oh my God, they could tell how the knife had made the cut. It was held so that the point was towards the left side and the handle towards the right. The cut was made obliquely. The liver was stabbed as if by the point of a sharp knife. There was another incision in the liver about 2.5 inches, and below, the left lobe of the liver was slit through by a vertical cut. 2 cuts were shown by a jag of the skin on the left side. The abdominal walls were divided vertically in the middle line to within 1/4 of an inch of the navel. The cut then took a horizontal course for 2.5 inches to the right side. It then divided the navel on the left side, rounded it, and made an incision parallel to the former horizontal incision, leaving the navel on a tongue of skin. Attached to the navel was 2.5 inches of the lower part of the rectus muscle of the left side of the abdomen. The incision then took an oblique course to the right. There was a stab of about 1 inch in the left groin, penetrating the skin in superficial fashion. Below that was a cut of 3 inches, going through all tissues, wounding the peritoneum to about the same extent. There had not been any appreciable bleeding from the vessels. Oh my God, I'd love to. Oh yeah. Oh, it would be amazing. And we're back to Mr. Crawford. What conclusion do you draw from that? Witness states that the cut in the abdomen was made after death, and that there would not be much blood left to escape on the hands of the murderer. The way in which the mutilation had been effected showed that the perpetrator of the crime possessed some knowledge. Mr. Crawford, I think I understand you to say that in your opinion, the cause of death was the cut in the throat. The witness says loss of blood from the throat caused by the cut. That was the first wound inflicted. Mr. Crawford, have you formed any opinion that the woman was standing when that wound was inflicted? The witness states, my opinion is that she was on the ground. Okay. Mr. Crawford, does the nature of the wounds lead you to any conclusion as to the kind of instrument with which they were being inflicted? The witness, with a sharp knife, and it must have been pointed. And from the cut in the abdomen, I should say the knife was at least 6 inches long. Mr. Crawford, would you consider the person who inflicted the wounds possessed great skill? The witness states a good deal of knowledge as to the position of the organs in the abdominal cavity and the way of removing them. Mr. Crawford, could the organs removed be used for any professional purposes? The witness states they would be of no use for a professional purpose. Well, he ate a piece of that kidney. Mr. Crawford, you have spoken of the extraction of the left kidney. Would it require great skill and knowledge to remove it? The witness says it would require a great deal of knowledge as to its position to remove it. It is easily overlooked. It is covered by a membrane. Mr. Crawford, would not such knowledge be likely to be possessed by one accustomed to cutting up animals? The witness said yes. Mr. Crawford said, have you been able to form any opinion as to whether the perpetrator of this act was disturbed when performing it? I would think, yeah. The witness says, I think he had sufficient time. My reason is that he would not have nicked the lower eyelids if he had been in a great hurry. I think he was disturbed with all of them. Something got in the way, so he wasn't able to do it perfect, if that makes sense. About how long do you think it take to inflict all these wounds and perpetrate such a deed? The witness states at least 5 minutes would be required. Mr. Crawford, can you, as a professional man, assign any reason for the removal of certain organs from the body? The witness says, no, I cannot. Have you any doubt in your mind that there was no struggle? The witness states, I feel sure that there was no struggle. Mr. Crawford, are you equally of opinion that the act would be that of one man, one person only? Witness says, I think so. I see no reason for any other opinion. Can you, as a professional man, account for the fact of no noise being heard by those in the immediate neighborhood? Witness states, the throat would be so instantaneously severed that I do not suppose there would be any time for least sound being emitted. Would you expect to find much blood on the person who inflicted the wounds? The witness says, no, I should not. Crawford says, could you say whether the blood spots on the piece of apron produced were of recent origin? The witness states they are of recent origin. Dr. Phillips brought on a piece of apron which had been found by a policeman in Goulston Street. It is possible to assert that it is human blood. The witness says, yeah, it's blood. On the piece of the apron brought there were smears of blood on one side as if a hand or a knife had been wiped on it. It fitted the piece of apron in evidence. Have you formed any opinion as to the purpose for which the face was mutilated? The witness states, simply to disfigure the corpse, I should think. Not much violence was required to inflict these injuries, witness states. A sharp knife was used, and not very much force would be required. By a juryman, they said. He did not think any drug was administered to the woman, judging from the breath. I feel like I read this already. Maybe it's because he keeps going over and over and over it. So he did not think any drug was administered to the woman, judging from the breath, but he had not yet examined the contents of the stomach. At this point, the inquiry was adjourned for a week. Mr. Crawford said that it might be of interest for the jury to know that the Court Common Council had unanimously adopted the suggestion of Lord Mayor that a reward of 500 should be offered for the detection and conviction of the murderer. The jury expressed satisfaction to the announcement. I loved it. The tour I went on. Oh, that's so interesting. It's so gruesome, but it's so interesting too. I don't know. It's weird for me, I guess. I don't know. Some people like true crime. Some people are just like, no. I'm one of those people that do. From the Times of Tuesday night, October 1888. The funeral of Catherine Eddowes, the victim of the Mitre Square murder, took place yesterday at Ilford Cemetery. The body was removed shortly after 1 o'clock from the mortuary in Gold Lane, where a vast concourse of people had assembled. A strong force of the city police under Mr. Superintendent Foster was present and conducted the cortege to the city boundary. Okay. Yeah, we'll do that. All right. Have fun. A strong force of the city police under Mr. Superintendent Foster was present and conducted the cortege to the city boundary. At Old Street, a large number of the Metropolitan Police were present under Inspector Barnum. The cortege passed Whitechapel Parish Church and along Mile End Road through Bow and Stratford to the cemetery. The sisters of the ill-fated woman and the man Kelly, with whom she had lived for 7 years, attended the funeral. Along the whole route, great sympathy was expressed for the relatives. It is stated that by a news agency that definite instructions have been issued to the police that in the event of any person being found murdered under circumstances similar to those of the recent crimes, they are not to remove the body of the victim, but to send notice immediately to a veterinary surgeon in the Southwest District, who holds several trained bloodhounds in readiness to be taken to the spot where the body may be found and to be at once put on the scent. Oh, gotcha. The Times of Thursday, 11th October 1888, page 5, carries an update on the inquiry in respect of the murder of Catherine Eddowes. A good deal of fresh evidence will be given at the adjourned inquest, which will be held today at the City Coroner's Court, Golden Lane, upon a body of the Mitre Square victim. Since the adjournment, Shelton, the coroner's officer, has, with the assistance of the city police authorities, discovered several new witnesses, including the daughter of the deceased, who was found to be occupying a respectable situation as a domestic in the neighborhood of Kensington. She states that she had not seen her mother for some time and certainly did not see her on the night she met her death. Two witnesses have also been found who state that they saw the deceased standing at the corner of Duke Street, Aldgate, a few minutes walking from Minor Square. This was as near as they can recollect, about 1:30, and she was then alone. They recognized her on the account of the white apron she was wearing. The contents of the deceased's stomach have been analyzed, but no trace of a narcotic can be discovered. 10 witnesses will be called today, and the coroner hopes to conclude the inquiry this sitting. So the Times of Friday, 12th October 1888, page 4, takes up the report on the Eddowes inquest, resumed the previous day. Yesterday morning, Mr. S.F. Langham, the city coroner, resumed the inquest at the mortuary in Golden Lane respecting the death of Catherine Eddowes, otherwise Conway or Kelly, who was found murdered in Mitre Square on the morning of Sunday, the 30th. During the inquiry, Major Henry Smith, the Assistant Commissioner of the City Police, Mr. M. William, the Inspector of City Detective Department, Mr. Superintendent Foster, and Mr. F. W. Foster, architect and surveyor of Old Jewry, who produced plans of the square, were present. The first witness examined Dr. George William Sequeira of 34 Jewry Street, Aldgate, who stated that he was called on Sunday, the 30th, to Mitre Square, and was the first medical man to arrive, being on the scene of the murder at 5 minutes to 2. He saw the position of the body, and he entirely agreed with Dr. Gordon Brown's evidence given the opening of the inquest. By Mr. Crawford, the city solicitor, he was acquainted with the locality and knew the position of the square. He would probably be the darkest corner of the square. It would probably be the darkest corner of the square where the body was found. There would have been sufficient light to enable the murderer to commit his crime without the aid of any additional light. Mr. Crawford, have you formed any opinion that the murderer had any design with respect to any particular part? I have formed the opinion that he had no particular design on any particular organ. So he just did it? Mr. Crawford, judging from the injuries inflicted, do you think he was possessed of great skills? No, I do not. Can you account for the absence of any noise? The death must have been instantaneous after the severance of the blood vessels and the windpipe. He did not think that the clothes of the assassin would necessarily be bespattered with blood. When witness arrived, life had been extinct, probably not more than a quarter of an hour, judging from the condition of the blood. Dr. William Sedgwick Saunders of 13 Queen Street, Cheapside, said he was Doctor of Medicine, Fellow of the Institute of Chemistry, Fellow of the Chemical Society, and Public Analyst of the City of London. He received the stomach of the deceased from Dr. Gordon Brown, carefully sealed, and the contents had not been interfered with in any way. He had carefully examined the stomach and its contents, more particularly for poisons of a narcotic class. With negative results, there are not being the faintest trace of any of these or any other poison. So he's not even using poison on any of these women. Like, that's crazy. There's no struggle, there's no noises, there's nothing. Like, wow. He must be really, really, really good at what he does. No struggle, no screaming, no nothing. And there's no drugs in their system. That's crazy. The only thing I can think of is he just walks up behind them and just cuts their throat. And then they're done. I don't know. By Mr. Crawford. He was present during the whole of the post-mortem examination. Having had ample opportunity of seeing the wounds inflicted, he agreed with Dr. Brown and Dr. Sequeira that they were not inflicted by a person of great skill. He equally agreed that the murderer had no particular design on any particular internal organ. Oh, by a person of great skill, my bad. Annie Phillips, living at 12 Dilston Grove, Southwark Park Road, was the next witness. She stated that she was married and that her husband was a lamp-black packer. She was the daughter of the deceased, who had always told witness that she was married to Thomas Conway, witness's father. She had not seen him for 15 or 18 months. The last time she saw him was when he was living with witness and her husband at 15 Anchor Street, Southwark Park. Her father was a hawker. She did not know what became of him after he left. He left without giving any particular reason for going, but he did not leave witness on very good terms. He did not say that he would never see her again. He was a teetotaler. I have no idea what that means. Teetotaler. He and her mother did not live on good terms after the latter took to drink. She had not the least idea where her father was living. He had no ill will against Catherine Eddowes, his wife, so far as the witness knew. She was told that her father had been in the 18th Royal Irish. He left her mother, solely because of her drinking habits. He was a pensioner and had had a pension since witness was 8 years old. She was now 23. It was 7 or 8 years ago since her father lived with her mother. Witness frequently saw her mother after they separated. Her mother applied to her for money. The last time she saw her mother alive was 2 years ago, 2 years and 1 month ago. She did not see her on the Saturday, the day previous to her death. Witness used to live in King Street, Bermondsey. That was about 2 years ago. On removing from there, witness did not leave any address. She had two brothers, Conway being their father. Her mother did not know where to find either of them. The information was purposely kept from her. Well, that's nice. You think it means they don't drink? It's spelled, the hell is it now? Here, I'll spell it in here. Is it Tito what? Yeah, teetotaler. Never heard of it. Whatever that means. Oh, come on. That's weird. It's not letting me. Oh, there we go. So it was 7 or 8 years ago since her father lived with her mother. Witness frequently saw her mother after they separated. Her mother applied to her for money. The last time she saw her mother alive was 2 years and 1 month. She did not see her on the Saturday, the previous day of her death. I read that. Yeah, her mother did not know where to find either of them. The information was purposely kept from her. She supposed that that was in order to prevent her mother from applying to them for money. By a juryman. It was between 15 and 18 months ago since her father lived with witness and her husband. Her father knew at that time that her mother was living with Kelly. By Mr. Crawford. You think it means doesn't drink? What a strange word. You're a teetotaler. You don't drink. It's so odd. By Mr. Crawford. She was not sure that her father was a pensioner of the 18th Royal Irish. It might have been the Connaught Rangers. Mr. Crawford observed that there was a pensioner of the 18th Royal Irish named Conway, but he was not the Conway who was wanted. The deceased last received money from witness about 2 years and 2 months ago when she waited upon witness in the latter's confinement. Witness had never had a letter from her mother. She had seen Kelly and her mother together in the lodging house in Flower and Dean Street. That was about 3.5 years ago. Witness knew that they lived together. Her father was living with her two brothers, but she could not say where. She could not give the slightest clue as to their whereabouts. Her brothers were aged 15 and 20. Witness did not know that her mother had recently been intimate with anyone besides Kelly in the lodging house. Detective Sergeant John Mitchell, City Police, the next witness replying to Mr. Crawford, said that he had made every effort, acting under instructions, to find the father and the brothers of the last witness, but without success. He had found a pensioner named Conway belonging to the 18th Royal Irish, but he was not identified as Thomas Conway in question. To the coroner, every endeavor possible has been made with a view to tracing the murderer. Mr. Crawford, do not go into that. I am sure that the jury believed that, and that the city police are doing everything they can with that object. Detective Baxter Hunt, City Police, replying to Mr. Crawford, stated that, acting under instructions, he had discovered the pensioner Conway belonging to the 18th Royal Irish. Witness had confronted the man with two of the deceased sisters who had failed to recognize him as the man who used to live with the deceased. Witness had made every effort to trace the Thomas Conway and the brothers referred to, but without result, by a juryman. The reason the daughter had not seen the man Conway, whom witness had traced, was that she had not at the time been discovered. Mr. Crawford intimidated that the daughter should see the man. Witness, in reply to a juryman, stated that the Conway whom he had discovered last received his pension on the 1st. By Mr. Crawford. He is Quartermaster Sergeant Dr. Gordon Brown. At this point was recalled. Mr. Crawford, the theory has been put forward that it is possible for Catherine Eddowes to have been taken to Mitre Square after her murder. What is your opinion about that? I think there's no doubt on that point. The blood at the left side of the deceased was clotted and must have flowed from her at the time of the injury to the throat. I do not believe the deceased moved in the slightest way after her throat was cut. Mr. Crawford, you have no doubt that the murder was committed at that spot. Yes, I feel quite sure it was. Police Constable Lewis Robinson stated that about 8:30 on the night of the 29th, he was on duty in High Street, Aldgate, where he saw a crowd of persons. He then saw a woman who was drunk and who had since been recognized as Catherine Meadows. She was lying on the footway. Witnesses asked if anyone in the crowd knew her or where she lived, but he received no answer. On the arrival of another constable, they took her to Bishopgate Police Station, where she was placed in a cell. By Mr. Crawford. No one in the crowd appeared to know the woman. Witness last saw her on the same evening at about 10 minutes to 9 o'clock in the police cell. Do you recollect whether she was wearing an apron? Yes, she was. Mr. Crawford, could you identify it? I could if I saw the whole of it. A brown paper parcel was produced from which two pieces of the apron were taken and shown to the witness, who said, to the best of my knowledge and belief, that is the apron. By a juryman. The woman smelled very strongly of drink. I don't mean to laugh, but it's just crazy that all these women do is drink all the time. James Byfield said that said he was station sergeant at Bishopgate Police Station. He remembered the woman referred to by the last witness being brought to the station at 9:15 on the evening of the 19th. She was very drunk. She was placed in a cell and was kept there until 1 o'clock the next morning. She was then sober and was discharged after giving her name as Mary Ann Kelly and her address at 6 Fashion Street. In answer to questions put to her by witness, she stated that she had been hopping by a juryman. He believed that nothing was given to her while she was in the cell. By Mr. Crawford, he did not notice that she was wearing an apron. Constable George Henry Hutt, 968, said he was at Bishopgate Street Police Station on Saturday night, the 29th. At 9:45, he took over the prisoners, among whom was the deceased. He visited her several times in the cell until 5 minutes to 1 o'clock, when he was directed by Sergeant Byfield to see whether any of the prisoners were fit to be discharged. Catherine Eddowes was found to be sober and was brought from the cell to the office, and after giving the name of Mary Ann Kelly, she was discharged. He saw her turn to the left after getting outside the station by a juryman. It was left to the assertion of the inspector or acting inspector to decide when a person who had been drunk was in a fit condition to be discharged. By another juryman, he visited the woman in the cell about every half hour from 5 minutes to 10 o'clock until 1 o'clock. She was sleeping when he took over the prisoners. At 12:15, she was awake and singing a song to herself. At 12:30, when he went to her, she asked him when she was going to be let out, and he replied, "When you are capable of taking care of yourself." She answered that she was capable of taking care of herself then. By Mr. Crawford. It was not witness, but Sergeant Byfield who discharged her. She left the station about 1 o'clock. In witness's opinion, she was quite capable of taking care of herself. She said nothing to witness as to where she was going. About 2 minutes before 1 o'clock, when bringing her out of the cell, she asked witness the time, and he replied, "Too late for you to get any more drink." She asked him again what time it was, and he replied, "Just on one." She then said, I shall get a D, fine hiding when I get home. Witness gathered from that she was going home. He noticed that she was wearing an apron, and to the best of his belief, the apron shown to the last witness was the one. By Mr. Crawford. It would take about 8 minutes to walk from the police station to Mitre Square, ordinary walking. So you're telling me since she left the police station, it took 9 minutes for her to get murdered. I mean, it's almost like he was waiting there, waiting for her so he could attack her. By a juryman, prisoners were not searched who were brought into the station drunk. Handkerchiefs or anything with which they could injure themselves would be taken from them. George James Morris, the next witness called, said he was watchman at Messrs. Kearley and Tongue's tea merchant in Mitre Square. He went on duty there about 7 o'clock in the evening. The coroner. What happened at quarter to 2 o'clock? Police constables Watkins, who was on the Mitre Square beat, knocked at the door of the warehouse. It was slightly on the jar. He was then sweeping the steps down towards the door, and he was doing so the door was pushed. He opened it wide and saw Watkins, who said, "For God's sakes, mate, come into my assistance." The constable was agitated, and witness thought he was ill. He had his lamp by his side, lighted, and asked Watkins what was the matter. Watkins replied, "There's another woman cut to pieces." Witness asked where she was, and Watkins replied, "In the corner." Having been a police constable himself, he knew what assistance was required. He went over to the, the spot indicated and turned his lamp on the body. He immediately ran up Mitre Street into Aldgate, blowing his whistle. He saw no suspicious persons about that time. He was soon joined by two police constables, and he told them to go into Mitre Square, that where there had been another terrible murder. He followed the constables there and took charge of his own premises again. He had heard no noise in the square before he was called by Watkins. Had there been any cry of distress, he would have heard it. By the juryman. He had charge of the two warehouses of Messrs. Curly and Tongue at the time in question. He was the one where the counting house was. It faced the square. By Mr. Crawford. Before being called by Watkins, he had had no occasion to go out of the office into the square. He was sure he had not quitted the premises before Watkins called him. There was nothing unusual in his door being open or in his door being at work at a quarter to 2 o'clock on Sunday morning by a juryman. His door had not been on jar more than 2 or 3 minutes before Watkins called him. Constable James Henry, 964 City Police, stated that at quarter to 10 o'clock on the night of the 29th, he went on his beat, which he described, and which took in Minor Street. He saw no suspicious person about a while on his beat, and he heard no cry or any noise. When he got into Aldgate, returning towards Duke Street, he heard a whistle and saw the witness Morris with a lump. Saw him with a lump. The latter, in answer to witness, said that a woman had been ripped up in Mitre Square. Witness saw a constable on the other side of the street. They went to Mitre Square, where they saw Watkins with the body of the deceased. The constable who followed the witness went to Dr. Securia, and private persons were dispatched for other constables, who arrived almost immediately, having heard the whistle. Witnesses waited there with Watkins, and information was at once sent to the inspector. As witnesses passed the post office clock at Aldgate on his beat, it was between 1 and 2 minutes to half past 1 o'clock. By a juryman. His beat took him down Church Passage to the end. He was there 3 or 4 minutes before he heard the whistle. It was then about 18 or 19 minutes to 2 o'clock. George Clapp said he lived at 5 Mitre Street, Aldgate, of which he was a caretaker. The back part of the house looked into Mitre Square on the night of the 29th. He and his wife went into bed at 11 o'clock. They slept in the back room on the second floor. During the night, he heard no disturbance or any noise of any kind. The first he heard of the murder in the square was between 5 and 6 o'clock in the following morning. By Mr. Crawford. The only other person in the house that night was a woman, a nurse who slept at the top of the house on the third floor. Constable Richard Pierce, 922 City Police, said he lived at number 3 Mitre Square. He went to bed on the night of the 29th, about 20 minutes after 12 o'clock. He heard no noise or disturbance of any kind. He first heard of the murder at 20 minutes past 2 o'clock, when he was called by a police constable. From his window, he could plainly see the spot where the murder was committed. By Mr. Crawford. He was the only tenant of number 3 Miner Square, where he lived with his wife and family. Joseph Lawand said that he lived at 45 Norfolk Road, Dalston. He was a commercial traveler. On the night of the murder, he was at the Imperial Club in Duke Street with Joseph Levy and Harry Harris. They went out of the club at 1:30 and left the place about 5 minutes later. They saw a man and a woman standing together at a corner in Church Passage in Duke Street, which led into Mitre Square. The woman was standing with her face towards the man. Witness could not see the woman's face. The man was taller than she. She had a black jacket and bonnet. He saw her put her hand on the man's chest. Witness had seen some clothing at the police station, and he believed the articles were the same that the woman he referred to was wearing. The coroner. Can you tell us what sort of a man it was with whom she was speaking? He had on a cloth cap with a peak. Mr. Crawford. Unless the jury wish it, I have a special reason why no further description of this man should be given now. Okay. The jury assented to Mr. Crawford's wish. Coroner. You have given a description of the man to the police, I suppose? Yes. The coroner states, would you know him again? I did it. By Mr. Crawford. The distance between the Imperial Club and the top of the church passage was where he saw the man and the woman standing together talking was about 9 or 10 yards. He fixed the time of leaving the club at 1:30 by reference to the club clock and to his own watch, and it would have been about 25 minutes to 2 o'clock when he saw the man and woman standing together. He had not heard a word of their conversation. They did not be in an angry mood. The woman did not appear to have put her hand on the man's chest as if she were pushing him away. Witness did not look back to see where they went. Joseph Hyman Levy of 1 Hutchinson Street, Aldgate, said he was a butcher. He was in the Imperial Club with the last witness, and the time when they rose to leave was 1:30 by the club clock. It was about 3 or 4 minutes after the half hour when they left. He noticed a man and woman standing together at the corner of the church passage, but he passed on without taking any further notice of them. He did not look at them. From what he saw, the man might have been 3 inches taller than the woman. He could not give any description of either of them. He went down on Duke Street into Aldgate, leaving the man and woman speaking together. He only fixed the time by the club clock. By a juryman. His suspicions were not aroused by the two persons. He thought the spot was very badly lighted. It was now much better lighted than it was on the night of the murder. He did not take much notice of the man and the woman. By Mr. Crawford. He was on the opposite pavement to the man and the woman. There was nothing that they saw to induce him to think that the man was doing any harm to her. Police Constable Alfred Long, 254A, stated that he was on duty in Gulston Street, Whitechapel, on the morning of the 30th. At about 2:55, he found a portion of an apron, produced as before. There were recent stains of blood on it. It was lying in the passage leading to a staircase of 118 and 119 ordinary model dwelling houses. Above it on the wall was written in chalk, "The Jews are the men that will not be blamed for nothing." He at once searched the staircase and areas of the building, but he found nothing. He then took the piece of apron to the Commercial Street police station, and reported to the inspector on duty. He had previously passed the spot where he found the apron at 20 minutes after 2, but it was not there then. By Mr. Crawford. Witness repeated as before the words which he saw written on the wall. Mr. Crawford, have you not put the word not in the wrong place? Is it not, the Jews are not the men that will be blamed for nothing? Witness repeated the words as he had previously read them. Mr. Crawford, how do you spell Jews? Witness, Jews. Mr. Crawford, now, was it not on the wall, Juwes? Is it not possible you are wrong? It may be as to the spelling. Mr. Crawford, and as to the place where the word not was put, witness again read the words as before. Mr. Crawford says, he had not noticed the wall before. He noticed the piece of apron first, and then the words on the wall. One corner of the apron was wet with blood. His light was on the time. His attention was attracted to the writing on the wall while he was searching. He could not form an opinion as to whether the writing was recent. He went on to the staircase for the dwelling, but made no inquiries in the house itself. By a juryman. The pocketbook in which he entered the words written on the wall at the time he noticed them was at Westminster. The witness examined was postponed, and the pocketbook was ordered to be produced. Detective Daniel Hulse, by City Police, stated that on Saturday, the 29th, from instructions received at Detective Office Old Jewry, he told a number of police officers in plain clothes to patrol the city all night. At about 2 minutes to 2 on the Sunday morning, he was at the corner of Houndsditch by Aldgate Church in company with Detectives Outram and Marriott of the City Police. They heard that a woman had been murdered in Mitre Square, and they all ran there and saw the body of the murdered woman. He gave instructions to have the neighborhood searched, and every man to be stopped and examined. He himself went by way of Middlesex Street at the east end of the city into Wentworth Street, where he stopped two men who gave a satisfactory account of themselves, and he allowed them to depart. He came through Goulston Street about 2:20 at the spot where the apron was found, and he then went back to Mitre Square and accompanied Inspector Collard to the mortuary. He there saw the deceased undressed, noticed that a portion of the apron she wore was missing. He accompanied Major Smith back to Mitre Square, where they heard a piece of apron had been found in Goulston Street. He then went to the Detective Hunt to Leman Street Police Station, where he heard that the piece of apron had been picked up and had been handed to Dr. Phillips. Witness and Hunt then went back to Goulston Street to the spot where the apron had been discovered. He saw some chalk writing on the wall. He remained there, and Hunt went for Mr. M. William for instructions to have the writing photographed. Directions were given for that to be done. Some of the Metropolitan Police thought it might cause a riot if the writing were seen and an outbreak against the Jews. It was decided to have the writing rubbed out. The people were at the time bringing out their stalls, which they did very early on the Sunday morning. When Hunt returned, inquiry was made at every tenement in the dwelling referred to Goulston Street, but no tidings could be obtained as to anyone having gone in who was likely to be the murderer. By Mr. Crawford. And about 20 minutes after 2, he passed over the spot where the piece of apron was found. If it was there, then he would not necessarily have seen it, for it was in the building. Mr. Crawford, did anyone suggest that it would be possible to take out the word Jews and leave the rest of the writing there? I suggested that the top line might be rubbed out, and the Metropolitan Police suggested the word Jews. The fear on the part of the Metropolitan Police of a riot was the sole cause of the writing on the wall being rubbed out. Mr. Crawford says, read out the exact words you took down in your book at the time. The Jews are not the men that will be blamed for nothing. Mr. Crawford says, the writing appeared to have been recently done. It was done with white chalk on the black part of the wall, by a juryman. The spot where the writing is the ground of the Metropolitan Police, and they insisted on having it rubbed out. Witness protested against it being rubbed out and wanted it to be left until Major Smith had seen it, by a juryman. He assumed that the writing was recent because, from the number of persons living in the tenement, he believed it would have been rubbed out had it been there for any time. There were about 3 lines of writing, which was in a good schoolboy hand, by another juryman. The writing was in the passage of the building itself and was on the black of the wall. Juryman, it seems to me strange that the police constable should have found this piece of apron and then for no inquiries to have been made in the building. There is a clue up to that point, and then it is altogether lost. Mr. Crawford, I have evidence that the city police did make a careful search in the tenement, but that was not until after the fact had come to their knowledge. I am afraid that will not meet the point raised by you to the juryman. There is a delay that took place. The man who found the piece of apron is a member of the Metropolitan Police. The witness Long, having returned with the pocketbook referred to, stated in reply to Mr. Crawford that the book contained the entry which he made at the time as the words were written on the wall. They were, the Jews are not the men. The Jews are the men that will not be blamed for nothing. The inspector made the remark that on the wall the word Jews, witness entered in his book what he believed was an exact copy of the words. Mr. Crawford, at all events, there was a discrepancy between what you wrote down, and was actually written on the wall. So far as regards the spelling of the word Jews, witness replied that the only remark the inspector made was as to the spelling of the word Jews. By Mr. Crawford, the moment he found the piece of apron, he searched the staircase leading to the building. He did not make any inquiry of the inmates in the tenements. There were either 6 or 7 staircases, one leading down and the other upstairs. He searched every staircase and could find no trace of blood or any recent footmarks. He found the apron at 5 minutes to 3, and when he searched the staircase, it would be about 3 o'clock. Having searched the staircase, he at once proceeded to the police station. Before proceeding to the station, he had heard that a murder had been committed in Mitre Square. When he started for the police station, he left Police Constable 190H in charge of the building. He did not know the constable's name. He was a member of the Metropolitan Police. Witness told him to keep observation on the dwelling, to see whether anyone left or entered it. Witness next returned to the building at 5 o'clock. The writing was rubbed out in witness's appearance at 5:30, or thereabouts. He heard no one object to the writing being rubbed out. A juryman, having heard of the murder and having afterwards found the piece of apron with blood on it and the writing on the wall, did it not strike you that it would be well to make some examination of the rooms in the building? You say you searched all the passages, but you would not expect the man who had committed the murder would hide himself there? Witness says, seeing the blood there, I thought that the murder had been committed and that the body might be placed in the building. The juryman, you did not search the rooms, but left a man to watch the building, and the whole clue seems to have passed away. I do not wish to say anything harsh, as I consider that the evidence of yourself and of the other members of the police redounds to the credit of all of you, but this does seem a point that requires a little investigation. You found a piece of apron wet with blood. You search all the passages, and then you leave the building in the care of a man to watch the front. Witness, I thought the best thing I could do was to go to the station and report the matter to the inspector on duty. The juryman, I feel sure you did your best. Mr. Crawford, may we take it that you thought you would be more likely to find the body of the murdered person there than the assassin? Witness stated, yes. Oh my God, they go through this so thoroughly. Hey, Suzanne. By a juryman. Witness was a stranger in the neighborhood. No one could have gone out of the front part of the building without being seen by a constable left on the spot by the witness. The coroner. In summing up, observed that the evidence had been of the most exhaustive character. He thought it would be far better now to leave the matter in the hands of the police, to follow it up with any further clues that might obtain, and for the jury to return a verdict of willful murder against some person or persons unknown. It had been shown by the evidence of Dr. Gordon Brown that the murderer must have taken a hold of the deceased woman and cut her throat, and by severing the vocal cords, prevented her from making any cry. All the evidence showed that no sound had been heard in the connection with the crime. The assassin had not only murdered the woman, defenseless as she was, but had so mangled the corpse as to render it almost impossible for the body to be identified. It's horrible. Hey, Brenda. Oh, no worries, girl. He thought they would agree that the evidence clearly showed that the woman was taken to the police station for being drunk and that she was discharged at about 1 o'clock on the morning of the murder. After that, two persons, a man and a woman, were seen talking together at the corner of Church Passage by the witness from the Imperial Club. And one of those witnesses had expressed his opinion that the articles of clothing which he had seen at the police station were the same as those worn by the woman. She was discharged from the station about 5 minutes after 1 o'clock. At 1:30, a police constable went round Minor Square, turned his lamp to the corner, but saw nothing there. Just 14 minutes afterwards, he found there the body of a woman who had been murdered. The evidence of the doctor showing that it must have taken 5 minutes to commit the murder and had to have inflicted the injuries on the body. Well, it had to have because as soon as, it's like as soon as she left the police station, she talked to a man, and then what? 5 minutes later, she was murdered. I mean, I'm wondering if it seemed like she knew the man with the way they're saying her hand was on his chest, almost lovingly. You know what I mean? So I would say maybe that was her murder, but then again, she knew this guy, so I don't know. I'm confused. The murder must have been committed between 1:30 and 1:44, and allowing 5 minutes for the crime to be committed, only 9 minutes were left to be accounted for. The history of the case was a very painful one. It appeared that Catherine Eddowes had been living first with Thomas Conway for 7 or 8 years. Her drinking habits had induced him to part from her, and the sister of Catherine Eddowes had stated that she was not married to him. There was nothing to suggest that either Conway or Kelly had anything to do with the murder, both of them seeming to be totally inoffensive men. It had been clearly proved that Kelly was in bed at the lodging house at the time of the murder. He had heard that the deceased had been taken up by the police, and knowing what the custom was in the city, he assumed that she would return to him in the morning. They had, it appeared, been out hopping for some weeks and had returned home on the Thursday, the 27th, taking lodging for that night in Shoe Lane, and on the Saturday, the last time Kelly saw anything of her, she stated that she was going to see whether she could find her daughter. Something might turn on the fact that she did not see her daughter. According to the evidence, the deceased was going to Bermondsey to see her, but the daughter had left the address there without mentioning any other address to which she was going. It was possible that Catherine Eddowes had gone to Bermondsey. What became of her in the interval between that and her being taken in charge, there was nothing to show, but she had evidently been drinking. There could be no doubt that a most vile murder had been committed by someone, person, or persons unknown, and he thought he might say by some person unknown. Dr. Brown believed that only one person was implicated. Unless the jury wished him to refer to any point in the evidence, there was nothing that need detain them further as far as the inquiry was concerned, and the police could be left with a free hand to follow up the investigation. A magnificent reward had been offered by the corporation, and it might be hoped that that would set persons on track and cause apprehension of the murderer. Mr. Crawford, Dr. Brown, in his evidence, expressed his belief as a medical man that only one person had committed the murder, the foreman. The jury, having consulted for about a couple of minutes, our verdict is willful murder by some person unknown. Coroner, that is the verdict of all of you? The foreman, yes. The coroner afterwards stated that the jury desired him to thank Mr. Crawford and the police for the assistance which they had rendered to the inquiry. He also wished to add his own thanks. The Times of Tuesday, 16th October 1888 on page 10 carried a report of the city police locating Thomas Conway. Oh, they finally found him. The East End murders. All right. The city police have succeeded in discovering Thomas Conway, who some years ago lived with Catherine Eddowes, the woman murdered in Mitre Square. Up to yesterday, the efforts of the detectives have been at fault, owing, as was suggested by the city solicitor at the inquest, to the fact that Conway had drawn his pension from the 18th Royal Irish Regiment under a false name, that of Thomas Quinn. Apparently, he had not read the papers, for he was ignorant till the last few days that he was being sought for. Then, however, he learned that the city detectives were inquiring for him. And yesterday afternoon, he and his two sons went to the detective offices of the police in Old Jewry and explained who they were. Conway was at once taken to see Miss Annie Phillips, which was Catherine Eddowes' daughter, who recognized him as her father. He states that he left Catherine Eddowes in 1880 in consequence of her intemperate habits. He knew that she had since been living with Kelly and had once or twice seen her in the streets, but had, as far as possible, kept out of her way, as he did not wish to have any further communication with her. Is it for you? Oh, you got another nosebleed? No way. Sorry, just one second.
Sure.
Just Lee. All right, just be careful. All right, so I found this. No, I want to play on TV. So this is the former mortuary, St. George in the East, a Jack the Ripper location. So I thought we'd watch this. Sorry, some kids came to the door looking for my boy to go outside and play basketball. Keeps getting all those, keeps getting nosebleeds. Maybe try that oil for your nose. I don't even think you'll need that. It's hot.
Quite simply stunning. It was built between 1714 and 1729 to the design of Nicholas Hawksmoor, and the tower is such a striking local landmark that Nicholas Pesner, in his East End edition of his Guide to the Buildings of England, was moved to describe it as the most original of Hawksmoor's East End churches.
I love this channel.
Its churchyard provides a lovely, quiet retreat from the ceaseless roar of the highway which passes to the south of the church. EastEnders have been taking the air at this halcyon spot since the late 19th century. Indeed, the churchyard holds the distinction of being one of the first London burial grounds to be transformed into a public park, and it was opened as a municipal garden in January 1877.
I'd love to go there.
But the tranquil little garden also holds a dark, some might even go so far as to say macabre, secret.
Just for the history, even. Not
For,
necessarily the bad history.
squatting close to the asphalt
beautiful.
path that meanders its way through the churchyard, you will find a tumble-down brick shed. The roof of this curious little building has long since fallen in, and skeletal rafters poke skywards from the remains of it. Ominous black shutters have been affixed to its crumbling outer walls in order to keep the public out. Nothing, though, can keep nature at bay, and weeds and saplings sprout from what passes for a roof, whilst, even on a bright summer's day, a feeling of chilly melancholy.
So weird. This here, look, you know, what is all that? Spray paint? I think that's skulls.
Seems to permeate the air around the ruin. It is safe to say that few of those who sit in or stroll through the garden bother to pay the tottering ruin
Oh, it's a
any
garden. I thought it was a set. Oh, okay, so this is a garden. My
real
bad.
attention. I would hazard to guess
said
that none of
mortuary.
them, well, right, maybe a few of them, are aware of the building's association with the Whitechapel murders of 1888 to 1891.
It's kind of in a shitty
And who could
position
blame
because
them?
look at there's apartment buildings. There's like that skyscraper. It looks like it's too bad.
for there is nothing here to suggest that there is any connection between this strange little hut and the notorious Victorian crime spree.
No.
Even the adjacent information board, which provides for those who are curious enough to read it,
What is that Nature Study Museum? St. George's Gardens. The building, originally a mortuary, was converted to a nature study museum in 1904 and opened to the public as a branch of the Whitechapel Museum. This was a pioneering effort in an overcrowded inner city area that gave local people the opportunity to have more contact with nature. Hmm. During the summer months, up to 1,000 people a day reputably visited the museum, most groups of local school children. The exhibits included tanks of 5 fish and amphibians, stuffed birds and mammals, and displays of butterflies. Immediately outside the Nature Study Museum was a wildflower garden with a beehive and an aviary. Several specimen trees were also planted in the gardens when the museum was opened. The Nature Study Museum was closed during the Second World War, and although this was originally to have been a temporary closure, it was reopened and fell into despair. A restoration project is being planned. Oh, that's good. They're going to restore it. That's good to hear.
a brief synopsis of the building's history, is mute about its Jack the Ripper connection, simply stating that it was originally a mortuary that was converted to a nature study museum in 1904 and opened to the public as a branch of the Whitechapel Museum. It was during its period as a mortuary that it acquired its connection with the Whitechapel murders. For this was the mortuary to which the bodies of two of the victims, those of Elizabeth Stride and the Pinchin Street torso, were brought in the immediate aftermath of their deaths.
Oh, shit.
And as such, it is one of only a handful of buildings to have survived in the district that have a direct connection with the case.
Yeah, it's old, you can tell.
One of the observations made at the inquest into the deaths of several of the victims, and in many other inquests of the era for that matter, was that Whitechapel lacked any proper mortuary facilities for the storage of bodies and the carrying out of post-mortems when the need arose. At the inquest into the death of Mary Nichols, the coroner, Wynne Edwin Baxter, commenced his summing up by commenting strongly on the absence of a public mortuary in Whitechapel where it was so greatly required. The jury agreed with him, and having returned their verdict, they added a rider expressing the full concurrence of the jury with the coroner's remarks as to the need of a mortuary for Whitechapel.
Yeah, because they didn't have one back
However,
then. They were
the debate
literally
over adequate mortuary
like they would take the bodies down there and they would put them in like in an alleyway and or even I don't even know like someone's house. They didn't have a mortuary or anything on that end of England. Yeah.
facilities in the district was not a new one. Indeed, the issue had been discussed by the parish vestry of St. George in the East as far back as July 1867.
Actually, I'm pretty sure I read that
the-
one of the deceased actually went into what the hell was it? Not a shoe shop, but like an apron shop or something, or a butcher. Was it the butcher? I think it was the butcher. Yeah. Yeah. They went into a butcher place. It was just to, yeah, that's messed up.
Meeting, the medical officer raised the issue that over the last quarter, 3 bodies had been left in the houses in which they had died for what he considered to be an unreasonable amount of time. In one case, the body remaining in the house
What does this say? The medical officer said, no doubt the members of the board would recollect that last quarter there were 3 names in the district of the body being left to the house for an unreasonable yeah, in a house, can you imagine? In one came, it remained as long as 21 days. Oh my God. And could not be removed because there was no place to remove it to. That's crazy. There was a case also the other day where a body was lying in a room occupied by 7 people, each person having only 219 cubic feet of air, and there the body remained until it became a perfect nuisance to the place. That is insane and disgusting. Wow. So disrespectful to the deceased.
for as long as
And the
21
people have to
days,
live with
and
it.
it could not be removed because, as he pointed out, there was no place to remove it to. There was a case only the other day, he said, where a body was left lying in a room that was occupied by 7 people, and it remained there until it became a perfect nuisance to the place.
Wow.
The vestry referred the matter to the Committee of Works, but there was a general feeling that a mortuary was necessary for the district. Although no exact year of construction can be ascertained for the building that now survives, it would appear that it had been erected in the churchyard by 1869, in which year the conditions inside it were severely criticised by a doctor who had performed a post-mortem there on the body of a murder victim. The East London Observer reported on his comments in its edition of Saturday the 17th of April, 1869. Mr. Budgett, the surgeon, who was called to give the results of a post-mortem examination of the body, made some extraordinary statements. He said that, in the interests of justice, he desired to state that he could not make a proper scientific examination of the body with the appliances placed at his command. He had had to make the examination in a small house at the end of St. George's Churchyard.
See what I mean?
In that house, there was no table, no light, no chair, no towel. To let in the light,
why
he had to
wouldn't
open the door and bring
they take their ambulance that they had at the time, take the body, and go to an actual mortuary instead of doing it there in Whitechapel? Something had to be close. You know what I mean? It's good. That's not the only place in England. They could have went somewhere else. That's just gross. Can you imagine in your own home, you're living with a dead body for 21 days? Wouldn't that make you sick? It'd make the whole family sick. It'd make everyone living in the house sick. I mean, that is unbelievable.
the body of the deceased to it. He had to place the body on a bench made of coffins, and then, placing the deceased on a coffin lid, he was able to make an examination of his body.
Oh my God.
In order to proceed with his examination, he felt obliged to take his coat off, and whilst he was busy, a crowd of people collected in the churchyard and looked at him and at the dead man's body. When he had taken the stomach out of the body, he found it was necessary for him to carry it into the churchyard in order that he might examine it sufficiently. The workhouse people thought it quite sufficient to send him an old pauper to carry water for him, and the water he had was carried in a bucket. There was no soap in the house, but the old pauper was able to produce a piece for a consideration. The witness thought it was his duty in the interests of justice that he should make this statement. Evidently stung by this public criticism, the parish vestry discussed the case at its meeting held on the 16th of April 1869 and concluded that the doctor was unjustified in his comments. Since the murder of Elizabeth Stride on the 30th of September 1888
Holy
took
crap,
place
look
in
at that.
Berners Street,
Nestle's milk? I think it's supposed to be Nestle. Gotta
just a
be.
few streets north of the churchyard, this was the nearest mortuary to the scene of the crime, and so her body was brought here. Looking at the structure today, you sense that it really must have been cramped inside, and the task of carrying out the post-mortem on the body cannot have been a pleasant one for Dr. George Baxter Phillips, who performed it. Some idea of how onerous the task must have been can be gleaned from this illustration, which appeared in the Penny Illustrated paper on the 6th of October, 1888. It must have been even more claustrophobic inside when, on the opening day of the inquest into Elizabeth Stride's death, the coroner and the jury trooped round to the mortuary to file in and view the body. The following report, which appeared in the Christchurch Times on Saturday the 6th of October, 1888, captured the gruesomeness of the scene that they encountered. Mr. Wynne E. Baxter, the coroner for the district, opened an inquest at the Vestry Hall, Cable Street, St. George's in the East, on the body of the unfortunate woman mysteriously murdered in a yard at the rear of a club in Berners Street, Commercial Road. The jury, having been sworn, proceeded to view the body, which lay in the mortuary adjoining the Vestry Hall, and the coroner held a consultation with Dr. Phillips and other medical men engaged in the case. After looking upon the horrible spectacle of the dead woman, still fully dressed in the clothes she wore, with a throat cut and blood-stained face, the jury returned to the Vestry Hall, where some evidence was then taken. Various witnesses also came to the mortuary in order to view the body, as efforts were made to identify the victim in the immediate aftermath of her murder. Amongst them was Mary Malcolm, who claimed, falsely as it transpired, that the victim was her sister, Elizabeth Watts. It was also reported by some newspapers that a large number of prostitutes were allowed to visit the mortuary with a view to identification. However, as the Dundee Courier reported, several of them professed to recognise the deceased, but they were unable to state her name and address.
Okay, today is June 1st. Please say your name and spell it.
I'm God, G-O-D.
One other witness who
God.
turned up at the mortuary was Matthew Packer, the fruit seller from Berners Street, who claimed that shortly before the time of the murder, he had sold grapes to a man who was accompanied by a woman who resembled the description of the victim. The Eastern Daily Press published a report on his visit, and what's interesting about the report is that it makes it clear just how rigorous the process was for admission to view the body. Matthew Packer, the owner of the little fruit shop in Berners Street, visited the mortuary, accompanied by two private detectives for the purpose of seeing whether he could identify the body of Lizzie Stride as that of the woman for whom the grapes were purchased on the night of the murder. At the entrance of the mortuary, the official in charge subjected Packer to a severe cross-examination in reference to his knowledge.
And those grapes definitely would link Jack the Ripper and long lives Elizabeth Stride here because they couldn't afford grapes. The person that purchased them could, you know what I mean? So it was like weird to see a prostitute with grapes. It just they can't even afford a place to sleep half the time. How can they afford grapes?
In the matter. He described correctly the clothes the woman wore and was led inside, where he had no difficulty identifying the body as that of the woman for whom the grapes were bought. 11 months later, in September 1889, the headless torso of an unidentified woman was found beneath a railway arch in Pynchon Street, a few streets south of the Elizabeth Stride murder site in Berner Street. As had happened with Liz Stride, the remains were taken to the St. George mortuary, where crowds once again gathered to try to gain admission and view the torso. The Aberdeen Press and Journal reported on the scene around the mortuary in its edition of Wednesday, the 11th of September,
Don't you want to see
1889.
that though?
The body of the deceased was removed to St. George's mortuary, and a large crowd gathered there directly, remaining throughout the whole day. Many unfortunates called to see the trunk, but none could identify it. In 1904, the building was converted for use as a nature study museum in what, as the information board outside puts it, was a pioneering effort in an overcrowded inner city area to give local people the opportunity to have more contact with nature. You can still make out the sign for the museum above the former entrance. You can't help thinking as you look at the tiny structure how even more crowded it must have been as a museum than it was as a
Yeah.
mortuary, especially when you consider that, according to the information board, during the summer months, up to 1,000 people a day reputedly visited the museum, mostly groups of local school
That's
children.
small.
The exhibits included tanks of live fish and amphibians, stuffed birds and mammals, and displays of butterflies. The question that immediately springs to mind is, where on earth did they put it all?
Good
The
question.
Nature Study Museum was closed during the Second World War, and although this was only meant to be a temporary measure, it never reopened, and the disused building gradually fell into disrepair. Although plans for a restoration and a reopening have been mooted from time to time, none of them have come to fruition, and the building becomes more and more ruinous with every year that passes. The day may well
Now
come
it's like an
when the decision is
eyesore.
taken to demolish it altogether, and should that come to pass, then yet another location with a direct connection to the Jack the Ripper murders will become nothing more than a distant memory. But for now, at least, we can relax in this lush and tranquil garden whilst pondering the dark and sinister past of this curious little ruin, as we crane our necks skyward to admire the soaring splendour of the striking white-walled church of St. George in the east that towers over it. And long may it continue to do so.
I hope they do fix it up. That would be nice. I mean, not leave such an eyesore for such a tragedy. Oh, all right, you guys. Well, I hope you enjoyed that. I think tomorrow I should read from that other book. Um, Letters in the Attic. I haven't read that in a while. So I think that's what I'll do for tomorrow. Well, thanks for joining me. I feel like making a homemade milkshake. I want a strawberry milkshake really bad. I don't know why it's like this it's summer. Ooh, I want a strawberry milkshake. I bought strawberries and I got vanilla ice cream, so I'm just gonna mix it together. All right, you guys have a great night. I'll be back tomorrow sometime. Bye.